Morning. I am fighting a cold, so if I lose my voice, I'm about to have someone come up and read the rest of this. We'll pray that doesn't happen, right? If you open your Bibles to Luke 15, we're going to look at this wonderful proverb or parable we have from Christ. And we are only, on the outset, we are only going to be examining the first brother, the first son, this morning, not the second one, just for the sake of time, but just to give you that on the outset. A couple years ago, for Super Bowl 51, the score at one point in the game was 28-3. The New England Patriots found themselves down to the Atlanta Falcons 28-3 early in the third quarter. And I want you to imagine watching the game, the Falcons score a touchdown in the third quarter, go up 28-3. You say, you know what, it's over. I'm turning off my TV. I'm going to bed. And the next morning you wake up and you're watching the news or you're reading the paper, scrolling on your phone, and you're shocked and astonished to find out that the winner of Super Bowl 51 was not the Falcons, it was the Patriots. They came back, they scored 25 unanswered points and won in overtime, capping the largest comeback in Super Bowl history. So, imagine you're a Patriots fan. Put yourself in the shoes of Jeff and Anna Phillips for a second. They're our resident Patriots fans. Imagine you watch the game on replay the next day. After you watched it the night before, you want to live it again. Okay, imagine you watched it, you loved it, you want to live it a second time, you're watching it. Now, think about the times where the Falcons score, okay, in the second time you watch it. Contrast the feelings between the first time you watched the game and the second time you watched the game. Are they different? They're drastically different, right? Why? Why is that? I remember, maybe you guys can resonate with this more, being probably most of us in here, at least most of us in here should be Chicago Cubs fans. I remember in the World Series, Game 7, in the 8th inning, Rajai Davis hit a game-tying home run, two-run home run, I believe? Yeah, two-run home run. Initially, the first time, I felt like throwing up, right? And the subsequent times I've watched it, I get goosebumps when he hits the home run. And I'm not an Indians fan at all. So why is that? Why is it so different? Well, here's the difference. It's that way because the deeper the Patriots dig themselves down, the farther ahead the Falcons get, the more sweet, incredible, and monumental the victory becomes. You see that? So when they score the second time, you're watching it, you're thinking, oh, it's just going to get better. Like they keep getting so far behind, the comeback's going to be even greater. The light of the victory shines brightest against the darkness of the near defeat. That's why it's so different. And what I want to tell you, and the point of this parable, is the glory of grace shines brightest against the backdrop of the ugliest and most deranged of rebellions. The glory of grace shines brightest against the backdrop of the ugliest and most deranged of rebellions. And this is exactly the story we have in this parable. So let's look through it a bit this morning. A few notes on the context of the parable. Jesus is knee-deep in his earthly ministry. He's preaching, healing, leading the people along in the ways of the new kingdom of God. His main audience and focus of ministry were the ones who were sick, as he says in Luke. The ones who I did not come for the healthy, I came for the sick. These were the social outcasts, the unchurched of the day. This drew major backlash from the church leaders, prompting them to condemn Jesus for interacting with the likes of the sick. Okay? This is what we see at the beginning of chapter 15, right? 15:2. And the Pharisees and the scribes grumbled, saying, "This man receives sinners and he eats with them." All right. So, this charge, which was an accurate charge, right? He's not contesting the accuracy of that charge. This charge prompts Jesus to launch into 3 different parables, okay? And he just rapid fires them off in chapter 15. They're all similar, okay? But 2 are closer than the third, okay? They're all in the same category, but 2 of them are much closer in plot and resolution, everything, than the third one, okay? The first one is the lost sheep, right? The lost sheep. And the second one is the lost coin, right? And the plot of these 2, we've heard these things a million times, right? The sheep wanders off, the shepherd leaves the other sheep, traverses dangers, finds the sheep, brings them back. There's rejoicing, there's a party. The story of the coin, a woman loses a coin in the house, she cleans the whole house, searches forever, finds the coin, there's a party, right? That is the that's the structure of those 2 parables. The third, the one we're going to look at today, is a little bit different, right? The prodigal son. The difference lies in the agency of the lost object. Okay? The difference lies in the agency of the lost party. You cannot fault a coin for being misplaced. Right? You're not going to scold the coin when you find it. If you are, you're sick. You need to, you don't scold a coin. And you really can't scold a sheep for wandering off. They're dumb. Right? So you don't fault the coin, you don't fault the sheep. However, what happens when the object that is lost wanders off on his own volition? What happens when the son disrespects, rebels, and sins against the father, and in so doing leaves? How will the father react to something like that? We all can understand the shepherd rejoicing at finding the lost sheep. The sheep has done nothing to him. We all can understand the woman rejoicing at the finding of the lost coin. The coin has done nothing to the woman. What will the father do when the son who has disrespected and rebelled against the father, what will the father do when the party who is lost is at fault? Will God accept us when we've sinned? Do you wonder that? Do you wonder this in your mind? The answer to that is yes. You wonder this all the time. We wonder if, in spite of our rebellion, God will truly accept us. We wonder this every time while we're singing, maybe even this morning. We are also recounting in our mind each and every sinful thing we've done this week that should be disqualifying us from singing to God. We wonder this every time we conceal our sins, every time we hide our weaknesses. We wonder this. Our children wonder this when they lie and hide from us, when they've broken one of the rules of the house. We constantly feel the humanistic tendency to earn our way. This is out of fear that God will not accept us in our weaknesses, so we try to improve our weaknesses. We want to prove ourselves useful. We treat others this way, right? Whether you know it or not, whether you would say this explicitly or not, one of our favorite phrases for other people is, "What have you done for me lately?" Right? That phrase is constantly going through our minds when we are grading the people in our lives. Let's look at some examples. We withhold affection from our spouses when they don't live up to our expectations. We respond with anger at our children when they act out of line. We withdraw from others when they hurt us. All of these things. Why? Because we do these things because deep down in the most sinful parts of our heart, we believe that in order to receive affection and acceptance, one must earn it. Or, at the very least, not do anything that jeopardizes it. So what happens when the son no longer deserves it? What happens when the son has jeopardized the acceptance of the father? Humanity is bent towards an ideology that doubts the acceptance of the son who has sinned against the father. The story of the prodigal destroys that bent by unleashing the glory of the grace and love of the Father upon wandering, at fault children like us. Let's see this glory for the next few minutes as we wander through this glorious parable. So, the story comes to us in 3 acts, okay, 3 major scenes. The first is in 11 through 16, or this part of it. You got the son later, the second son later. We're not going to look at that this morning. We're going to look at the first 3 parts of the first son, the younger son. The first act, the first scene is the departure. The departure. The second one is the resolve or the resolution. The third one is the reception. Okay? Departure, resolution, reception. We'll explain those in a second. Let's look at the first one, the departure. Look at 11 through 16. And this is Jesus talking. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son had gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered, or you could literally say he threw it to the wind, his property in reckless living. When he'd spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into the fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything." Okay, so in considering the offense of the son in this text, it would really be hard to think of a more realistic way for the son to offend the father. Okay? He does everything wrong. All right? Every step, every word, every attitude could not be more offensive to the father in this situation. It would be hard to create a situation that is more selfishly bent in favor of the son and hurtful towards the father. Essentially, if we get into the philosophy of what has happened, the son has equated the father with his possessions. The son has equated the father with his possessions and with his wealth. He has reduced his father to his mere possessions. It's pretty bad. We do this all the time. Okay? Husbands, do you equate your wife with physical intimacy? Wives, do you equate your husband with affirmation, provision, and undying attention? Parents, do you equate your children with the pride that comes with them? Employers, do you equate your employees with the production that they bring? Teens, do you equate your parents with the provisions that they give you? Parishioners, churchgoers, do you equate your pastor and church with the benefits that can come to you? We do this all the time. All the time. In equating these two things, the son has begun to see the person of his father as an obstacle to the materials of his father. He has begun to see the person of his father as an obstacle to the material wealth of his father. Do you see that? Think of him looking through his father to his father's possessions. That's what's happening. Okay? So he endeavors to what? Cut out the middleman. He endeavors to cut out the middleman. Father, he essentially says, let's cut out the middleman. Give me what I want, and what I want isn't you. What I want is the wealth and possessions that will be coming my way after you die. Let's expedite this and have it now. This is a harsh reductionism, one that is similar to Jacob with Rachel. We've seen this before. Genesis 29, Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, that I may go into her, for my time is completed. Harsh reductionism. But here's the thing. As shocking as the request is, the response is more shocking. Okay? So as shocking as the request is, the response is more shocking. And the reason it's so shocking is that it's like silent. What is the response? Okay. He abdicates. The father gives the son what he's asking. And though it's short in the text, this process would have been very long. We're not talking about a check. He's not writing a check to the son. We're not talking about a wire transfer. We're talking about sectioning off property and land and selling it, selling possessions, right? We're talking about a massive liquidation, one that would have caused the father much financial pain because he probably wasn't going to be getting full price for a lot of stuff, but also much societal shame and embarrassment. Do you think that the people he was selling it to wouldn't ask, why are you selling this? So he's going through not only the financial pain of it, but also the embarrassing side of it as he cuts up his possessions and his property and and all of his material wealth, and he starts to sell it and liquidate it so that he can give it to his youngest son. Not to mention the pain that he would be feeling the entire time of the way that his son has treated him. As a side note, can't spend much time on this. Notice the father's complete sufficiency. Where was his hope? Was it in his son? No. Was it in his wealth? No. Was it in how he was viewed in the public? No. It was in God. How you know if your hope is in God is how you react when things are taken from you. That's how you know. And here, his hope is in God. I'd love to spend more time on the father, but we cannot. Let's move on. So, that is the departure. Okay, he acquiesces, he abdicates, he liquefies all of his assets, gives the share to the son leaves, goes. What happens next? Well, I want you to imagine that we were to go into, take any high school in the area, and we were to pick an unsaved teen at random, give them thousands of dollars and a plane ticket to Las Vegas, and what do you think would happen? Anything and everything, right? That is what happens in the text, right? The son goes and he literally tosses his wealth to the wind, tosses his money to the wind, right? He prodigaled his wealth, right? Because prodigal means to spend recklessly. He recklessly spent his wealth on lavish living. When the money would run out, he would take loans. When the loans were called, he would take out loans to pay the loans. In short, the son brought intense financial ruin upon himself, right? Just in time for the famine to strike, of course. He wasn't thinking ahead. And this was all done in the name of living however he wanted to. But he doesn't only bring upon himself severe financial ruin. He brings upon himself severe moral ruin as well, right? It's actually a tragic story when you think about it. Think about him pursuing all of these joys only to be turned away at the end of it all, and spending money recklessly, furiously, trying to find some semblance of satisfaction, of joy, slowly starting to realize that he has left the only thing in his life that meant anything to him truly, that he has made this dire mistake, but suppressing those feelings because he just can't go back, and going full steam ahead and digging himself deeper and deeper and deeper. Have you ever tried to fill a bathtub with the drain open? Every parent in this room has tried to do that, right? What happens? Never fills up. Sometimes it pools a little bit, right? But it never fills up. That's what he's doing. There's joy, it's gone. Okay, let me try that again. Joy, it's gone. Every single thing he tries, a burst of joy, then it's gone. Sad. It's terrible. Think about your kids. Think about them doing this. It's tragic. In doing so, in trying these things, he brought intense imprisonment upon himself. Like a mouse searching for a snack, or a fish searching for a worm, or a deer finding some salt. His desires led him to destruction. Such as the warnings in the book of Proverbs. Now this is a long text, but it's so critical, so perfect for this point in Jesus' parable. It's going to be in two parts on the slide, so follow along on the slide. It's in Proverbs 7. For at the window of my house I have looked out through my lattice, and I have seen among the simple, I have perceived among the youths a young man lacking sense, passing along the street near her corner, taking the road to her house in the twilight, in the evening, at the time of night and darkness. And behold, the woman meets him, dressed as a prostitute, wily of heart. She is loud and wayward. Her feet do not stay at home, now in the street, now in the market, and at every corner she lies in wait. She seizes him, kisses him, and with bold face she says to him, I had to offer sacrifices, and today I have paid my vows. So now I have come out to meet you, to seek you eagerly, and I have found you. I have spread my couch with coverings, colored linens from Egyptian linen. I have perfumed my bed with myrrh, aloes, and cinnamon. Come, let us take our fill of love till morning. Let us delight ourselves with love. For my husband is not at home. He has gone on a long journey. He took a bag of money with him. At full moon he will come home. With much seductive speech, she persuades him. With her smooth talk, she compels him. The young man is looking for satisfaction. He's looking for joy. He's looking for pleasure, all sorts of things. It all makes sense in his mind. She's attractive. She's enticing him. Her husband is gone. Why wouldn't he pursue her? The writer goes on. This is the mind of the prodigal. He wants the joy that the far land has to offer. The writer of Proverbs goes on to show what is really happening. All at once, he follows her as an ox goes to the slaughter, or as a stag is caught fast till an arrow pierces its liver, as a bird rushes into a snare. He does not know that it will cost him his life. This is the prodigal. This is where he's at. He's in this now. It's not just the prodigal. It's everyone in this room. Every single one of us has done what is being described philosophically in this text. The story, the tragedy of the prodigal is our tragedy as well. Each one of us has equalized God the Father with the gifts that he has created. When we think of God, we think of food, money, sex, power, possessions, etc. In equating God with his gifts, we have exchanged giver with the gift. We've told God, like the Son told the Father, give us your gifts without giving us yourself. We would prefer to live in your creation without your presence. That's what's happened. Paul outlines this in Romans 1. For although they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Claiming to be wise, they became fools and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling mortal man and birds and animals and creeping things. In exchanging giver for the gift, we've brought ruin upon ourselves. Look at the world. Insatiable want. Think about all the advertisements, all the stuff we buy. Just insatiable want. You buy a new thing, and then 2 weeks later, what? You want a new thing, right? That's how it is. Ravenous pride, right? Severed relationships. Endless violence. Well over 54 million abortions. Disastrous sexual ethic. And shattered families. These are all the consequences of exchanging the giver with his gifts. They all flow from that. In running from giver, hoping to find satisfaction, we have brought endless want and hurt into our lives. Just look around us at the world. There's a rather striking description of this idea found in Ezekiel chapter 16. I'm not going to quote from it, but I would, when you get some time on your own this week, maybe for your devotions, I would recommend you read the chapter. It's very difficult to read. But essentially, God has married the nation of Israel. He has put his love upon her, but she has left him to pursue other lovers. And the outworkings of all that are found in Ezekiel 16. And it's just tragic. Because in trying to search and trying to find other satisfaction, she's destroyed herself. And not only that, but she's also hurt and offended and severed relationship with the one who has created her and has given her beauty, given her joy, all of that stuff. This is what we've done with God. So when you read Ezekiel 16, you need to think about yourself. When you read the prodigal son, you need to think about yourself. We have done this, and the outcome has been disastrous. So this is where we see the story coming to at the end of the first act. The son has departed. The outcome has been disastrous, right? He's in the pig pen, which is the worst job you could have as a Jewish son. It was unlawful for that to happen, but he had to survive. And that's where he's at. But something breaks, okay? Something changes, right? He comes to his senses, the text says, comes to himself. Son realizes his folly, comes to himself. Let's look further. Look at verses 17 through 20a. This is Act 2. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants." And he arose and he came to his father. This is the resolution, right? He resolves, he understands his problem. He finally comes to his senses, right? He understands. Now, what he exactly understands at this point is up for debate, but he at least understands that he has made a grave error, and while he knows how to get back home, he has no idea how to get back into the sonship of the Father. Okay? He knows the way home, but he doesn't know how to become the son again. So he wants to become what? He wants to become a servant, right? He wants to come home and be a servant. He wants to be a day laborer, which was the lowest laborer that a man like the Father would employ, right? It was guys who would come in day to day. He'd pay them for the day, and they'd leave. They weren't in the house. Their needs weren't provided for past the wages that they'd be paid. This is what he's looking for, a hired worker. He wants to just be near the Father again to try to get little bits of grace where he can and to work his way back into that sort of favored position. Darrell Bach, a commentator, puts it this way: the son decides that he will tell his father. He will place himself at his father's discretion, assert no rights, and recognize that he has no claims. He is unworthy of being received as a family member. His request is simply for daily care and sustenance as a day laborer, and the lowest of three classes of laborers. He is prepared to be the lowest of the low. So, I want to slightly commend the actions of the Son. He has recognized that apart from the Father, he is only going to find ruin. Okay? He has recognized that he cannot pave his own way in life. He has seen the beauty of the beaten down paths of his Father's land and longs to return to his presence, even in a reduced role. He understands that, but he has no idea what is about to come to him when he returns. He understands that if he goes back, his Father might take him back in as a servant, and he can work in his Father's house, and he can get out of the pig pen. But he has not a single clue in the whole world what is about to happen to him when he goes back home. He has no idea what grace is, has no idea. Likewise, we, having seen the carnage of the world, can desire better for ourselves. We see the folly of the world, we see how it's all falling apart, and we can say, you know what, God's way is going to be better. I would prefer to be a worker in the kingdom of God than a resident of the world. We can understand that we cannot return the way we left as sons, but we can seek to simply be a servant in his house. So he's desiring a good thing, right? But his desire is incomplete. His desire is short-sighted. It's not full. It's not all the way good. It's partially good, but it's not all the way good because he doesn't understand what grace is yet. So the son sets off for home. He's done the logical thing. He's done what anyone who has come to their senses would do. He did what made sense. Let's see what happens. So this moves us into Act 3 of the parable of the younger son. Look at 20b through 24. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him, felt compassion, ran and embraced him and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Notice that he doesn't say the whole thing, right? The original plan was to say, let me be a worker, right? That part. Why do you think he didn't say it? Why do you think he didn't finish his line? A lot of commentators believe that the reason he didn't finish his line was because he was interrupted. And he was interrupted with these words. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe, put it on him. Put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let us eat and celebrate, for this son of mine was dead, and he is alive again. He was lost, but he's found. They began to celebrate. The father's response is staggering. As I said before, the son did the logical thing. He did what anyone who came to their senses would do. He did what made sense. The father, on the other hand, did what didn't make any sense. The father's action transcends logic and sense. The father poured out grace upon the son. God's grace transcends what makes sense in this text. Just as the son recklessly spent his finances on his own passions and desires, the father recklessly spent his love on the son. He was the one watching. He was the one waiting. It was his heart that sprang when he saw the figure from a distance. It was his legs, who probably hadn't run in a very long time, which started to run in order to lessen the time that his son was far from home. His legs ran to lessen the time that his son was away from home. It was his arms that embraced, his lips that kissed, his heart that received, and it was his grace that was given. The expenditure was equally reckless. But there's a major difference. So while they're both spending recklessly, there's a major difference. And here's the difference. The son took from the father to spend on himself. The father gave of himself in order to spend on the son, on you. Whose robe is on your back? Whose ring is on your finger? Whose blood are you covered in? Whose grace do you live in? Whose peace do you exist in? God's. Jesus's. God sent his son to be the Savior of the world. God gave of himself that he might spend his love on us. And while you are robed and you have shoes on your feet and you have a ring on your finger and you are being accepted, who's going robeless, shoeless, ringless, and who was rejected? God the Son endured the poverty that we deserve so that we can enjoy the wealth that we don't deserve. Keller says it this way. I'm not going to wait, this is the father saying to the son, I'm not going to wait until you've paid off your debt, as if he could, right? I'm not going to wait until you've duly groveled. You are not going to earn your way back into the family. I am going to simply take you back. I will cover your nakedness, your poverty and rags with the robes of my office and honor. Through Christ, God has given everything that is needed to receive you back into the family. Keller goes on. The father's welcome to the repentant son was literally reckless because he refused to reckon or count his sin against him or demand repayment. Jesus is showing us the God of great expenditure, who is nothing if not prodigal or reckless towards us, his children. Through God's reckless grace is our greatest hope, a life-changing experience, and the subject of this book. Consider yourself this morning. Turn inward. Think about where you're at. Perhaps you are still in the phase of spending recklessly. You're still searching for what you left from the Father. You're still looking for that. Perhaps you're in that phase. You're still under the delusion that you can make it in the world without your Father. Or perhaps you have tasted the famine of your own desires and have longed for the land of your father. Perhaps you've come to your senses and you now know how desperately you need the Father. Perhaps you are even in church this morning as an effort to return to the Father. In either case, I exhort you, I implore you to cast yourself upon the grace of the Father. Do not try to earn. Do not try to work. Do not try to do what Jacob does and subvert and manipulate and try to push your way back into the house. Take what is being offered to you freely by the Father running to you, which is free reception back into the house of God. This is the whole point of my message. There is no other way to experience the land of the Father, the joy, the blessing, the hope, everything. The land of the Father, unless you are living in the grace of the Father afforded by the blood of his firstborn Son. There is no way to live in the house of the Father unless you are living in the grace of the Father afforded by the blood of his firstborn Son. You see, who's the main character of the story? The Father, right? Who's the secondary character of the story? Might be tempted to think it's the Son, as in the younger son. The second character in the story is the guy telling the parable. Because it's through his blood, it's through his work, his sacrifice, and his love for us that we are able, as prodigal children, to come back to the Father. The secondary character is Jesus Christ, the one telling the parable. The person who makes it all possible for us to return to the Father is Jesus Christ. The Father has given us the Son so that he could pour out the grace needed to bring us back into the family, back into the house. So if you don't know Christ, I am pleading with you to be reconciled to God through his blood. There's a story I want to read you. It's called The Runaway. And it's a modern day parable written by Philip Yancey. It's in his book, What's So Amazing About Grace. And it's about the prodigal. Let me just read it. It's a little long, but just bear with me. It hits us right in our culture. Jesus often talked about grace, though he almost never used the word. Instead, he communicated grace through stories we know as parables, especially the one about the prodigal son found in Luke 15:11-32. I've taken the liberty of putting that story in a modern setting. So here's the story. A young girl grows up on a cherry orchard just above Traverse City, Michigan. Her parents, a bit old-fashioned, tend to overreact to her nose ring, the music she listens to, the length of her skirts. They ground her a few times, but she seethes inside. "I hate you," she screams at her father when he knocks on the door of her room after an argument. And that night, she acts on a plan she has mentally rehearsed scores of times. She runs away. She's visited Detroit only once before on a bus trip with her youth group to watch the Tigers play. Because newspapers in Traverse City report in lurid detail the gangs, drugs, and violence in downtown Detroit, she concludes that this is probably the last place her parents will look for her. California, maybe, or Florida, but not Detroit. Her second day there, she meets a man who drives the biggest car she's ever seen. He offers her a ride, buys her lunch, arranges a place for her to stay. He gives her some pills that make her feel better than she's ever felt before. She was right all along, she decides. Her parents were keeping her from all the fun. The good life continues for a month, 2 months, a year. The man with the big car, she calls him boss, teaches her a few things that men like. Since she's underage, men pay a premium for her. She lives in a penthouse and orders room service whenever she wants. Occasionally, she thinks about the folks back home, but their lives now seem so boring that she can hardly believe she grew up there. She has a brief scare when she sees her picture printed on the back of a milk carton with the headline, "Have you seen this child?" But by now, she has blonde hair, and with all the makeup and body piercing jewelry she wears, nobody would mistake her for a child. Besides, most of her friends are runaways, and nobody squeals in Detroit. After a year, the first sallow signs of illness appear, and it amazes her how fast the boss turns mean. "These days we can't mess around," he growls, and before she knows it, she's out on the street without a penny to her name. She still turns a couple of tricks at night, but they don't pay much, and all the money goes to supporting her drug habit. When winter blows in, she finds herself sleeping on metal grates outside the big department stores. Sleeping is the wrong word. A teenage girl at night in downtown Detroit can never relax her guard. Dark bands circle her eyes. Her cough worsens. One night, as she lies awake listening for footsteps, all of a sudden everything about her life looks different. She no longer feels like a woman of the world. She feels like a little girl lost in a cold, frightening city. She begins to whimper. Her pockets are empty. She's hungry. She needs a fix. She pulls her legs tight underneath her and shivers under the newspapers she's piled atop her coat. Something jolts a synapse of memory, and a single image fills her mind. Of May in Traverse City, when a million cherry trees bloom at once, with her golden retriever dashing through the rows and rows of blossomy trees in chase of a tennis ball. "God, why did I leave?" she says to herself, and pain stabs at her heart. "My dog back home eats better than I do now." She's sobbing. She knows in a flash that more than anything else in the world she wants to go home. 3 straight phone calls, 3 straight connections with the answering machine. She hangs up without leaving a message the first 2 times. But the 3rd time she says, "Dad, Mom, it's me. I was wondering about maybe coming home. I'm catching a bus up your way, and it'll get there about midnight tomorrow. If you're not there, well, I guess I'll just stay on the bus until it hits Canada." It takes about 7 hours for a bus to make it all the stops between Detroit and Traverse City. And during that time, she realizes the flaws in her plan. What if her parents were out of town and missed the message? Shouldn't she have just waited another day or so until she could talk to them? Even if they are home, they probably wrote her off as dead long ago. She should have given them some time to overcome the shock. Her thoughts bounce back and forth between those worries and the speech she's preparing for her father. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know I was wrong. It's not your fault. It's all mine. Dad, can you forgive me?" She says the words over and over, her throat tightening even as she rehearses them. She hasn't apologized to anyone in years. The bus has been driving with lights on since Bay City. The snowflakes hit the road and the asphalt steams. She's forgotten how dark it gets out at night out here. A deer darts across the road and the bus swerves. Every so often a billboard sign posting the mileage to Traverse City. When the bus finally rolls into the station, its air brakes hissing in protest, the driver announces in a crackly voice over the microphone, 15 minutes, folks. That's all we have here. 15 minutes to decide her life. She checks herself in a compact mirror, smooths her hair, licks the lipstick off her teeth, looks at the tobacco stains on her fingertips, and wonders if her parents will notice if they're there. She walks into the terminal not knowing what to expect, and not one of the thousand scenes that have played out in her mind prepare her for what she sees. There, in the concrete walls and plastic chairs bus terminal in Traverse City, Michigan, stands a group of 40 family members, brothers and sisters and great aunts and uncles, cousins and a grandmother and great-grandmother to boot. They are all wearing ridiculous-looking party hats and blowing noisemakers. Taped across the entire wall of the terminal is a computer-generated banner that reads, "Welcome home." Out of the crowd of well-wishers breaks her dad. She looks through tears and begins the memorized speech. "Dad, I'm sorry. I know." He interrupts her. "Hush, child. We've got no time for that. No time for apologies. you'll be late for the party. A banquet's waiting for you at home. And so it is with God's amazing grace. Paul says in 2 Corinthians 5, therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. We implore you, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For our sake, he made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Be reconciled to Christ. Be reconciled to God through Christ. That is the story of the parable. Let me just add a couple of thoughts of application towards this. We didn't touch on the older brother, but there are two kinds of people. There are two kinds of children. Those whose body follows their hearts, and those whose body do not. Who are you? Does your body follow your heart? And who are your children? It's not always the outward rebellion that is the trickiest. Sometimes it's the inward. That's the first point. Second point, to emphasize the effort of the Son is to minimize the grace of the Father. So, if you read this story, okay, and you hear someone else tell the story, and they start emphasizing how well the Son did in picking himself up and carrying him back to the Father, and in doing that, he actually starts minimizing the Father's grace by maximizing the effort of the Son. You're going to tell them you're not telling the story correctly. But when you live your life emphasizing your efforts over the grace of the Father, you are not telling the story of the gospel. The gospel doesn't mention our effort because it's non-existent. The gospel only mentions the grace of God because it is abundantly provided to us in Christ. To emphasize the effort of the Son is to minimize the grace of the Father. And lastly, to treat other prodigal children with anything but grace is to subvert the Father's way. And what I mean by this is that you may have children of your own that are reckless. You certainly know children of the Father who are reckless, maybe even towards you. To not live your life the way the Father lived his life is incorrect. It's a contradiction. It's a contradiction to be forgiven and not to forgive. And there are several situations in your life, all of our lives, where we are called to act in grace and we withhold. And it proves that we do not fully understand the Father like we should. But God is gracious to us. But it's a contradiction to be forgiven and not to forgive. Do not be like the older brother. So, let me have the musicians come up. So what is the ultimate message of the parable? I'm going to put it on the screen. Keller sums it up nicely. God's love and forgiveness can pardon and restore any and every kind of sin or wrongdoing. It doesn't matter who you are or what you've done. It doesn't matter if you've deliberately oppressed or even murdered people or how much you've abused yourself. The younger brother knew that in his father's house there was abundant food to spare, but he also discovered that there was grace to spare. There is no evil that the Father's love cannot pardon and cover. There is no sin that is match for his grace. Let's return to the Super Bowl for a second. As you're rewatching the Patriots' victory, what are you thinking about the Falcons' touchdowns? Their touchdowns and their mounting lead. You're probably thinking, yes. But even this will fall under the power of the comeback. This is what should be your exact attitude towards your past life of sin and even your present life of sin in light of God's grace. Ah, yes. But even those sins will fall under the power of the grace of the Father.